Hello, I am back to the apartment and I am going to give a debrief here on one of the sessions I saw today. And it was kind of a happy surprise because it was called Path, or it looked like it was going to cover maybe a research project or something of RA, and it ended up being all about precision medicine, which is my favorite thing in the world to talk about. So it ended up being really cool. Plus they had free lunch, which when you go to a conference, that's always really good. It started off, the first sentence, it had two doctors that spoke, two different rheumatologists. And the first one came up, and the first sentence she said is, RA is really about 50 to 80 diseases all wrapped up into one. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Never heard that before. Oh, and this was a session by GSK Pharmaceutical. And basically, a lot of these sessions, what happens is it's hard sometimes for us to follow because they add a lot of scientific stuff in there and they throw out images of different biology photos. So I do have slides of those that I will share in accordance with this video. But the things to really, as a patient, when you're looking at these to make the sessions not so overwhelming, is really just to try to not focus in on those specific big words and really just the overall takeaway. And so that's what I'm going to do here. There were a lot of slides that talked about the TNF, like you've heard of TNF inhibitors. It's inhibiting these different cytokines, these different proteins that we have in our bodies. And so they talked about those type of activities in our bodies that are associated with the TNF markers and those particular pathways. If your TNF is more active than, say, somebody else with rheumatoid arthritis, then by being on a TNF inhibitor like a Humira or an Enbrel, for example, that would help. You would probably have a better response to a treatment that's a TNF-I inhibitor. So they made a whole bunch of different biology. So they showed IL, which is IL. So it said IL-17, IL-1, IL-6, and you might have noticed at some point that a lot of our biologics, it'll say it's an IL-17 inhibitor and an IL-1 inhibitor. And what it's talking about is these proteins, these fibroblasts, these cytokines, all of this different crap that's in our bodies and in our immune system are reacting in different ways. And that's why, again, some of us respond to treatments better than others. And so this session started by talking about all of these cells come into play, and they come into play in different ways in our body. And so one in particular, she pointed out IL-6, I think it was, and she said she looks at that as the hormone cytokine, and that it often is related to more extreme fatigue and anemia and vascular levels. So it just showed that if you have that part of your body or that part of your immune system triggered, that maybe, and of course there's a lot of this is maybe, that could be where some more extreme fatigue or the anemia and that type of thing come into play. So after they broke those out, they also said that you can't forget about the comorbidities that obviously affect, but they said we also often think of comorbidities in RA or any of the other diseases as happening as the disease progresses, and I'm guilty of saying that myself. But they pointed out that comorbidities really can start in early RA, and they could also affect our disease activity score, or DAS, and that needs to be considered too when you're trying to treat patients. You have to figure out, even if it's early RA, do they already have different comorbidities, or they didn't say multimorbidities, but that's a phrase that we learned a couple years ago, and that's when you have another disease that's not part of your RA or not part of your AI arthritis disease, but it does impact you because you take medication for it and things like that. So essentially they tied it into a session that Deb saw that was about preclinical RA. And if you've seen any of our debriefs in the past, you'll know that we started hearing about remission, and we were like, what, remission? So now we're hearing studies about what they're calling people who through our biomarkers, through having certain things in your blood, that they are able to predict that these people eventually develop rheumatoid arthritis. And when it's important is if they can find it early and you have a predisposition to potentially having rheumatoid arthritis, they're trying to think of ethically how they can even treat that with an aggressive medication if they're not even sure. So that's kind of a debate, and it was a hot debate today. And saying that they went into this targeted therapies and figuring out and mapping the individual journey of each of the RA patients, and how as a doctor you could start to think about tailoring your treatments based on if this patient tends to have more IL-17 symptoms or TNF symptoms. So that in itself was pretty fascinating, I'd say. And then I don't have the pictures of the slides in front of me, but it did go into talking about there were 4 defined RA phenotypes or pathways. So they're already starting to realize 4 very specific RA subgroups, and by studying those subgroups in more detail, they hope that they're going to be able to start figuring out which of these drugs then are going to work best in this different subtype. So that is what we call precision medicine. And it just was, it's just a happy surprise that I fell into that session. Didn't even expect it. But there you go. There's my update on that session. And there was a...
Hello, this is Leila, your health education and engagement manager, and reporting to you from the last day of ACR. I am so sorry that my video yesterday seemed so dreadful. I was not feeling well yesterday and had a lot of brain fog. So just wanted to let you all know because, yeah, I watched that video back and I seemed like I was not having fun. But I was still having fun. So just wanted to let you know. Today I went to 2 different sessions that I will be talking to you about, and both of them were very much in my personal interest. So I'm very excited to report back to you on those 2 different sessions. The first session that I went to today was called a Daltroy lecture, and the main speaker's name was Cheryl Crow, who is a great friend of our organization. She is a social media influencer in the arthritis space. She has rheumatoid arthritis and also is a occupational therapist. And the first session that I went to today was called a Daltroy lecture, which was pretty much like a question and answer interview type session. And the main speaker who was being interviewed's name was Cheryl Crow, who is a great friend of our organization. She is both a social media influencer in the arthritis space and also an occupational therapist by trade. And so she has created a presence online, basically creating life hacks on TikTok and Instagram and all the other social platforms in regards to arthritis. A few takeaways that I got from this session is 1, to be careful of misinformation that may be on the internet. There might be a lot of different people trying to promote things. So just to be aware and be cautious of any information that you find on social media and make sure to check your sources. And also, as health educators, we have to make sure to also use resources, use citing, and use information that's already out there to support our claims to make sure that the information that we're giving out is also very accurate. One of the other things that Cheryl suggested when doing social media content in regards to health education is to maybe create a Venn diagram of things that you are genuinely interested in, that you want to report on, that you want to talk about. And that's one side of the Venn diagram. And the other side would be, what are you knowledgeable in? And another piece of information that Cheryl shared during the session was when you're thinking about content that you want to create, make sure to create a Venn diagram, one side being your interests and your expertise and things that you're knowledgeable about, and another side would be, what does the audience want to see? What are they asking questions about? And what can you help to provide them with? And try to find things that are in the middle that are both of interest to you and of interest to the audience to make sure that you have a focus for the different type of content that you want to make. I believe that this session overall was such a great idea. Social media is such a great way to get information out there. And, there are a few drawbacks that we all have to be aware of. But I do believe that overall, social media is the best way for us to be able to reach more people. And the better the content and the more correct the content overall, I think that this session was so great. And very informative about social media. Social media is something that we all use and something that is such a great tool to be able to get information out to the masses. So being able to see the different drawbacks and make sure that we are able to work around those is very important. And also, being able to just put out the right information out there is very important, and a great way to do that is social media.
Hi everybody, welcome to day 3. I'm kind of tired and you can probably see that on my face, but again, it's been an awesome ACR. And today is Monday and our 3rd day, full day. And today I wanted to kind of go over the session that I actually went to today, among other meetings that we had. We had 3 other meetings that we also had piled into everything. So it's been a whirlwind, but such a learning journey. So the session I went to specifically today, and I wanted to tell you also, the person that was moderating the session was my rheumatologist. So I wanted to make sure I was actually went to the session and let her know that I did go to her session. So the session was the jury on JAKs. JAK inhibitors, future and rheumatic diseases. And this main speaker was John Giles. And I'm looking down at my notes because I wanted to make sure I can't look back at my photos from the slides earlier, so I had to quick take notes. So you'll see me looking down at my little piece of paper over here. So John Giles was our speaker. He is a doctor he's a regular doctor and also master's in public health. He's from Columbia University. So the actual pieces that we were learning about, so the learning objectives of actually the session were to review current JAK inhibitor mechanisms, the applications, and the Blackbox warnings, to critically appraise, I'm sorry, I can hardly read my writing, appraise the data behind the new Blackbox warning, examine special populations characteristics to guide risk stratification and risk targeted use. So he went into a lot of different categories as far as he gave us the timeline of JAK inhibitor development. He went into the JAK inhibitor mechanisms of action on each one of them, and actually kind of showed a really cool slide on that. And he talked about the FDA approved indications in rheumatic diseases. Also, the overlapping cytokine signaling in RA and arteriosclerosis, so related to heart disease and things like that. It was interesting too, because with JAK inhibitors being fairly new, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and he was kind of listing them out. And he also was so good about being very specific. There were questions even asked in the after the session where people are asking questions. He's like, we don't know, and I'm not going to speculate. He was drawing hard lines as far as that went. So I think time will tell. There's a lot of more research that's going to be happening. Let's see, as far as the regulatory warnings. So it talked about the FDA Blackbox Warnings. Those actually went into effect on September of 2021. And in Europe, the Risk Assessment Committee also established some new guidelines in Europe in October of 22. So it's November right now of 22, and in just a month ago, those were laid out, which I thought was just really interesting. And he actually dug deep into those as well. Sorry, I'm shaking. I'm holding and got my charger on, and my hand is not steady. I apologize. So in his conclusion slide, he basically kind of broke it down into a couple different categories. He said JAK inhibitors are still a valuable piece of what the rheumatologists use as far as a toolbox. It's still definitely a important piece for that. Patients should be warned about the risks appropriate to the demographics and their risk factors. There is also, they need to look through and screen risk mitigation with the regulation. So looking specifically at those for specific people. And also, expanding on this. We've got emerging studies all the time and continuing to learn. So this is going to be a continuing process and a continuing learning environment. So that kind of is the wrap on the session that I went to today. They've been incredibly busy days. We got to go to several of the booths today, visit some of our friends, say hi and goodbye because we're getting close. Tomorrow we're leaving. And it's just great to be in person again. It's just such a valuable process, and meeting people and having our meetings and continuing with that. So I know this is a little bit long-winded, but I wanted you guys to hear the crux of such an important session for us. So I appreciate you, and until next time and our next debrief, see you guys later.